Hi, I'm Hal Roberts. This is Bridge City News. Here's some of the top stories we've been following. A video of an Alberta man verbally attacking Deputy Prime Minister Freeland has gone viral. We have the details. Lethbridge MP Rachel Thomas has written a letter of concern to Canada's Heritage Minister. We will explain why. And more than 1,000 lives were lost and hundreds of thousands of homes were destroyed as flooding from a monsoon wiped out many communities in Pakistan.
Your nation, your province, your southern Alberta. From the heart of Lethbridge, it's Bridge City News with Hal Roberts.
Thanks so much for joining us. Deputy Prime Minister Freeland returned to her home province of Alberta over the weekend. While she was in Grande Prairie, she was verbally assaulted by a man who called her a traitor. There was a lot of profanity, so a large portion of the video you're about to see and hear had to be censored.
What are you doing in Alberta? You traitors. Get the out of this province.
You don't belong here.
You're a traitor. You
Yeah, go ahead and hide.
all right, guys. You got a traitor elevator. Kirsty Freeland, I'm going. I'll walk up with my own power. Don't touch me, okay? Don't touch me. Go.
We are
Do not
leaving.
touch me.
We are leaving.
Do you love that? Do you love her? Do you love Kirsty Freeland?
No. Get.
Don't not. Don't tell me to get. I'll walk out with my own power, okay? So back off. Back off. I know this gentleman here. Cunt shouldn't even be allowed in Alberta. She's destroying this country. Your kids are going to have no future. Okay?
There are reports that the man who launched the verbal tirade on Minister Freeland is a Grande Prairie resident named Elliot McDavid. He apparently lives in the city and has been an active organizer of Freedom Convoy events in and around his region. Deputy Prime Minister Freeland took to social media responding to the verbal attack by the man in Grande Prairie. Freeland posted to her Twitter account. In it, she said she was proud to be from Alberta and happy to be spending a few days in the Peace Country. What happened was wrong. Nobody anywhere should have to put up with threats and intimidation. The Alberta I know is filled with kind and welcoming people, and I'm grateful for the warm welcome I've received from so many in Edmonton, Grande Prairie, and Peace River over the past few days. One unpleasant incident does not change that. Alberta Premier Jason Kenney condemned the verbal attack against Freeland while she was in Grande Prairie. Kenney also tweeted to Chrystia Freeland saying, "You know that our governments have had a lot of serious disagreements, but you're always welcome to come and visit us here in the province, where you grew up and where your family lives, as are all Canadians." Prime Minister Justin Trudeau also responded to the verbal attack Freeland received in Grande Prairie over the weekend. Trudeau said what he saw and heard is not an isolated incident.
Sadly, this is something we're seeing more and more of. Certainly, members of this community have seen it, but we're seeing increasingly people in public life, people in positions of responsibility, particularly women, racialized Canadians, people of minority or different community groups being targeted almost because of the increasing strength of your voices, of your positions, of the impact you're having around the world and around our country. We're seeing a backlash. And we've seen it, first of all, over the past many years. Anytime a woman speaks up on social media, she is so often subject to harassment and toxicity that we're actually seeing her rights and her voice and her freedom of expression diminished.
Prime Minister Trudeau also said human rights are moving backwards in many parts of the world, and Canada needs to show what a positive, inclusive society looks like. Trudeau launched Ottawa's first LGBTQ2+ action plan.
This is a whole-of-government plan that will guide our ongoing work to fight discrimination, to break down barriers, to advance rights, and to build a future where everyone in Canada is truly free to be who they are and love whom they love. As we've seen rights moving backwards in many parts of the world, some closer than we'd like to admit, we need to continue to stand up to show what a truly positive, inclusive, strong society looks like.
Lethbridge MP Rachel Thomas has written a letter to Canada's Heritage Minister, Pablo Rodriguez. Now, in her letter, she condemns the Trudeau Liberals for giving Laith Marouf around $133,000 to teach Canadian broadcasters about anti-racism. Thomas says Marouf himself has encouraged violent acts against Jews in the past in his various social media posts. Thomas says this was the wrong person for the job, and that is why she reached out to the Heritage Minister.
You know, the Heritage Minister was called upon to give account, and he refused. And so I watched this unfold for several days. And finally, I decided to write a letter to the minister directly calling him to account. So I brought to his attention the fact that he had been entirely silent on this matter and that I felt it inappropriate, and I was looking forward to a response. Unfortunately, almost a week has passed and I still haven't received a response from the minister. I did, however, receive a response from his department, which was simply to say that the minister is not responsible to answer my request, but rather that Mr. Hussein, another minister, would be responsible to do so, which I find ironic and quite hypocritical because, of course, it's the Minister of Heritage that oversees the Heritage Department, which is the one that funded this individual who is anti-Semitic in his conduct.
The government of Alberta announced an increase in funding for palliative and end-of-life care. More than $11.3 million will go towards 25 projects. Officials say the funds will help in 4 priority areas, including earlier access to care, community supports and services, education and training, and research and innovation. Health Minister Jason Copping says the added funding will mean that more families will receive the extra support they need, including cultural and spiritual help.
For so many Albertans, it's important to incorporate spiritual and cultural aspects in end-of-life care. The Chinese Christian Wing K Nursing Home Association is receiving funding to create a culturally responsive toolkit for those working and living in continuing care homes. And a project in Fort Chipewyan will develop and establish a home-based palliative care service for the residents of this remote First Nation. From education to spirituality and from research to grief support, all of these projects are critical to improving end-of-life care.
Well, it was another warm and sunny day across much of southwestern Alberta today. The rain clouds have moved on. Jeanette Roche is in now with an early peek at the forecast. Jeanette, the moisture is gone and we'll be back to some sizzling hot temperatures this week.
Yeah, the summer isn't letting up just yet, Hal. We're going to be seeing beautiful sunshine and temperatures climbing back into the mid-30s by the long weekend. Overnight, though, we're looking at clear skies, overnight low of 11 degrees, making it feel a little chilly in the mornings. Tomorrow, Tuesday, though, beautiful sunny day, high of 28. I'll be back later on in the show to let you know how soon those 20s are going to be transitioning to the 30s. I'll see you then.
Thanks so much, Jeanette. Back to school is just around the corner for many here in our province. Students at the Lethbridge School Division are set to dust off their backpacks and head back to their desks. Video journalist Micah Quinn is at the Lethbridge School Division Education Centre. Micah, what kind of health guidelines can parents expect for their kids this fall?
Well, Hal, according to Dr. Cheryl Gilmore, the superintendent of the Lethbridge School Division, certain health measures will be implemented, including optional masking.
What we say is, if you feel that you want to wear a mask, absolutely support it and embraced, and it's not a mandatory piece of going into the school. Those recommendations are, have to do with recognizing or trying to monitor if their child or children have COVID, and then the recommendations from there is that as long as someone has COVID, is diagnosed with COVID or symptomatic, that they stay home. Again, those are all recommendations. They're not specific to schools. Our schools certainly have the close monitoring of cleanliness and encouragement of hand sanitization, and of course constant monitoring of our filtration systems and ongoing maintenance of those. So we feel we're in a great space in terms of being safe and healthy for children and staff to walk in those doors.
Students will head back to the classroom on September 6th. Back to you, Hal.
Thanks so much, Micah. The numbers are in from the Shoes for Kids YQL Shoe Drive, which took place on Saturday, and the event was a huge success. The shoes will go to city families of students in need, along with students at the Kainai and Pekani Reserves. Members of the Lethbridge Police Service, the Watch, Alberta RCMP, Pekani RCMP, and the Blood Tribe Police Service volunteered to help collect the shoes during the event. Monica Cove, the board president for the organization, says there was a big haul of shoes and cash donations this year.
Our shoe drive brought in well over 256 pairs of runners for children going back to school, which was amazing. We also raised in cash leading up to the event, as well as cash received day of event, well over $13,000. I think that we have a few more cash donations coming in. We're hoping to hit at least the $18,000 mark. That will be in the next week or so.
Now, you can still donate cash or shoes by contacting the event organizers. Our very own Mayor Blaine Hagan made a huge splash for the Shoes for Kids YQL event. The first annual Dunk Our Mayor event saw Hagan take a dunk to raise money to provide shoes for those in our community who were most in need. It was put on by Optical Studio in Lethbridge, and over $600 was raised by community members as Mayor Hagan took the plunge. According to a new report out of the University of Toronto, Alberta has the highest percentage for food insecurity in the country at 28.3%. Daniel McIntyre, the executive director with the Interfaith Food Bank, says about 1 in 5 people are not able to put food on their table. McIntyre says they're seeing more single people coming in and using the food bank services.
A lot of those are seniors and students, and of course people with disabilities as well. We find in Alberta we have a lot of working people who are struggling right now, as well as a lot of people who are on social assistance programs that have not been able to keep up with the inflation.
Mac Nickel with the Lethbridge Food Bank says that the 28% mentioned in the report is not very surprising.
It is the hardest part of it all. We've been finding that food insecurity across multiple different populations has steadily been growing in Canada and Alberta, and specifically Lethbridge, over the last half a decade or so. Just less support, governmental or other organizations. Sometimes we keep in mind the families and those that need support, but sometimes a single adult needs that help too to just help get through, and it just doesn't really exist to the same level of support as others.
By the way, both the Interfaith and Lethbridge Food Bank say they're also lacking in donations right now, desperately in need. Goats have been known to control invasive weeds. Well, Monday was the last day for the city's grazing program. The goats are brought in twice per summer to graze at both Alexander Wilderness Park and Indian Battle Park. An official with the city says the goats typically will target leafy spurge, wormwood, and thistle.
Absence wormwood has been here for a long time, but it's not something that the goats have really taken to. Like, they've taken to spurge really, really well. They search it out. They want to eat it. The wormwood is just not as palatable, so whenever we can get a group that really likes it, that's great, and they'll teach the others that, hey, this is something that we need to chew on and get rid of and kind of manage that way.
So cute. The goats are managed by a herder and the co-owner of the Creekside Goat Company, Robert Fink, who says they're with the animals 24/7.
We supply the water, the tanks, the fences, the goats, the dogs. When we come into a job, we supply everything. And so it's a hands-free maintenance for whoever's hiring us. That way we do have guard dogs. In the cities, we don't use guard dogs as much because we have so many run-ins with people and their own dogs. So we just keep a better eye on them. When we're out in the more open spaces, we do use the Peruvian or the Pyrenees, the Great Pyrenees dogs. And then we run Border Collies that they're our right hand.
There are about 200 goats nibbling down on those weeds on Monday afternoon. Hundreds of people gathered at Western University's London, Ontario campus to protest the university's COVID-19 mandates. Western is the only post-secondary institution in Canada mandating booster shots for students and staff returning to campus next month.
Well, I saw the announcement and I decided that we were in a position where maybe we could get some more students involved and sort of get them up to date on the facts. So I put together a few sort of graphics and some media posts, hoping to get some momentum just to inform any students that we possibly could. And it led to obviously this. It reached a lot of people, and obviously a lot of people related to it and have felt the importance of it. It's distant from what the students want. It's distant from what from where we are in reality now, almost 2.5 years into this pandemic, and things are not the same as they were day one. So we need the university to take up notice of what students want and what the situation is calling for, what the provincial government is calling for, which is to not make up our own guidelines, but to follow the public health guidelines.
A man from Quebec who was killed fighting in Ukraine was described as a hero at a weekend memorial service. Montreal's Ukrainian leaders say they wanted to pay tribute to Emile Antoine Roy-Surroy, who died back in July.
Today is Divine Liturgy and a funeral mass also for Émile Antoine Roy-Sirois, who was a Montrealer, born and raised here, and who went to fight on the front defending Ukraine and was killed by the Russians during their invasion on July 18th. So after the invasion, there are many people who are feeling the plight of the Ukrainian people, and he was one of those who felt a calling to go defend children. That was his calling, and that was his purpose, that he told his family, I'm going to go and defend Ukrainian children. And that's what brought him to Ukraine and to volunteer in the army. He has his close family that's here, but then it's the community. We want to pay homage to him, to recognize his sacrifice, and to thank him as a community.
Meanwhile, in Ukraine, Ukrainian authorities said Russian forces shelled Sloviansk on Sunday, damaging both residential buildings and a school.
Я начинал засыпать, и я почувствовал, как упала земля мне в рот. Я открываю глаза, и надо мной вылетает рама с окном. Вот рама, и стекло летит. И я не в понятках, потому что ни взрыва, ничего не было. И сразу же я услышал запах гари, и возле меня лежал телефон, и я стал вызывать 101 МЧС.
A number of countries want to see the United States and Iran hammer out a new nuclear deal similar to what was in place in 2015. Our foreign affairs expert and political reporter Lisa Daftari has the details.
As we're getting closer to striking a deal, they're saying a month. Now, I mean, 2030 is actually a long shot, but the point being that there will always be this sunset clause. Whether we get into a deal with them or not, they're very close to getting a bomb. Now, the only thing that they have not been able to get is the delivery system, and that is something that they can get in a short period of time. And that's the point, that they have been able to laterally grow their program. They've been enriching uranium at a very rapid speed. They have been shutting off the cameras, as we have talked about before. They have been denying access to IAEA inspectors. That is the UN's nuclear watchdog group.
Make sure you catch the full interview with foreign affairs expert Lisa Daftari coming up after Business News. Close to 300,000 homes have been destroyed, around 1,000 lives lost, many roads rendered impassable, and blackouts across Pakistan as a massive storm and flooding has wiped out so many communities.
अफ़सोस आहे सभिनी सामान वियो आहे खाद वियो आहे अटो वियो आहे घर विया हाणे असां ग़रीब काॾों ठाराए सघंदासीं असां परेशान आहियूं खाइण जे लाइ नंढा बच्चा भुख मरनि था बड़ी आहे बीमारी आहे छा कयूं इहो अफ़सोस आहे त असां हिननि खे काॾों बनाए सघंदासीं काॾों ठाराए सघंदासीं पेट जो कयूं महांग जो दौरु आहे पेट जो कयूं या जॻहनि जो कयूं मनहनि जो कयूं काॾे वियूं ॿियो मज़ूरी बज़ूरी न आहे एॾो को रोज़गार न आहे धंधो न आहे का शइ बि न आहे.
Praying for so many people in Pakistan. That's rough. Well, in our neck of the woods, we had sun mixed with clouds today and fairly warm as we headed back to work. And the mercury will be climbing quite a bit this week. Full weather details are coming up. It was another sunny and hot day across much of southwestern Alberta today. Jeanette Rocher is in now with all of the weather details. Jeanette, even though the end of August is just around the corner, it'll feel more like midsummer for much of the week heading into the Labor Day long weekend?
Yeah, you know, it's funny, Hal, because we're all talking about back to school this week, and the only thing changing in my mind weather-wise are maybe the mornings are feeling a tiny bit colder because that overnight temperature is getting lower. The daytime temperatures, however, are not. In fact, they are getting higher. Take a look here. A high of 28 on Tuesday, climbing all the way up to 32 for Wednesday, rounding back out to 27 on Thursday, climbing back up again on Friday. Then the mercury is going to climb even higher for the weekend as we begin that Labor Day long weekend. 36 the high on both Saturday and Sunday, and it's going to be sunny skies all the way through for the next 7 days. So we're definitely climbing higher than that average high for this time of year, which is 24. Average low is 8 degrees, 34. That was our high temperature on this day back in 1996. Who knows? Maybe we'll break a record sometime this weekend. Our lowest on record was 2003. It was 1 degree. Sun rose this morning at 6:42 a.m. and our sun set this evening at 8:22 p.m., giving us 13 hours and 40 minutes of daylight. It's going fast, folks. Victoria's high tomorrow, 26 sunny skies, still seeing a humidex in the 30s. Same thing for Vancouver, 25 the high, lots of sunshine, much warmer inland. Looking at a humidex of 36, 29 the high in Edmonton, humidex of 31, sunny skies, and a high of 28 tomorrow in Calgary under sunny skies. Looking at the rest of the prairies, 30 degrees the high in Saskatoon. Saskatoon still sitting with a humidex at about over 30. So it's feeling much warmer there. 29 the high in Regina and 28 in Winnipeg with sunny skies. I was going to mention the wind there is going to be gusting 20 to 40 kilometers per hour. Toronto seeing a chance of showers and a risk of a thunderstorm, 25 the high, 25 also the high in Ottawa tomorrow. Same situation for Ottawa and Montreal with rain turning to thunderstorms, so it could be a little bit wet over there. On the East Coast tomorrow, 32 degrees the high, a mix of sun and cloud in Fredericton. Halifax, 28, 29 in Charlottetown, and St. John's, Newfoundland is sitting at 25 degrees with a mix of sun and cloud as well. So there you have it. That is your forecast.
The chill in the housing market is now being felt by many tradespeople, including carpenters and landscapers. Inflation has already caused some homeowners to delay big renovation projects as prices for building materials, fixtures, and appliances jumped. More recently, higher mortgage rates put a damper on the number of homes being sold. According to a recent housing study at Harvard, growth in homeowner spending on improvements is expected to slow for the rest of the year and for the first half of 2023. Inflation is also impacting home values. TD also says it is expecting to see up to a 25% drop in Canadian home prices by early next year. For one day, movie tickets will just be $3 as American theaters launch a new National Cinema Day to lure moviegoers back to the box office. The Cinema Foundation announced that September 3rd, there will be a nationwide discount in more than 3,000 theaters. Major chains, including AMC and Regal Cinemas, are participating, as are the majority of film studios. At participating theaters, tickets will be no more than $3 for every showing in every format. Labor Day weekend is traditionally one of the slowest for theaters. No word yet if Canadian theaters will also follow suit. South Korean battery maker LG and Honda are investing $4.4 billion in a joint venture in the United States to produce batteries for electric vehicles. LG and the Japanese automaker say the plant will produce batteries exclusively for Honda vehicles assembled in North America. That includes the company's luxury Acura brand. Construction is expected to begin early next year. Mass production of advanced lithium-ion batteries is to start at the end of 2025. Now, here's a look at today's markets. The TSX was down 37 points on the day to finish at 19,836. The Dow was also down 181 to 32,098. The S&P 500 was down 27 points to 4,030, and the Nasdaq was down 124 on the day to 12,017. West Texas Intermediate Oil was up $3.90 to $96.96 U.S. per barrel. Natural gas was up 6 cents to $9.35 U.S. Gold was down 4 cents to $17.37.05 U.S. an ounce, and silver was up a cent to $18.77 U.S. an ounce. Feed wheat is at $10.94 per bushel. Barley was at $8.03. Canola is at $19.16, and corn is at $11.68 per bushel. Live cattle were up 75 cents to $141.55. Feeder cattle October contract was down $2.33 to $181.08. And lean hogs October contract was up $1.60 to $92.25. The Canadian dollar was even over the past 24 hours at 76.86 US. Recapping one of our top stories, the government of Alberta announced an increase in funding for palliative and end-of-life care. More than $11.3 million will go towards 25 projects. Officials say the funds will help in 4 priority areas, including earlier access to care, community supports and services, education and training, and research and innovation. There are fears surrounding the possibility of a leak at Europe's largest nuclear plant as the battle intensifies in Ukraine between Ukrainian and Russian forces. Our foreign affairs expert Lisa Daftari will have details momentarily. And listen, if you see news happening in your community, be sure to send us an email at info@bridgecitynews.ca. We'd love to hear from you.
Here's your Bridge City News community calendar. Discover homegrown produce and homemade products at the Downtown Farmers Market at Festival Square in Lethbridge. Every Wednesday beginning at 9 a.m. until September 4th, you'll find over 15 local vendors selling fresh fruit and vegetables, delicious baked goods, homemade soaps, and so much more. Enjoy the relaxing atmosphere and support local producers and artisans at the same time. Go back in time and see what it was like to live as a pioneer. Coyote Flats Pioneer Village is a Western heritage museum located 1.5 kilometers south of Pitcher Butte. Walk through the village and see a railway station, post office, fire hall, school, and so much more. The museum is open daily from 9 a.m. to 4:30 p.m. with admission of $10 for adults or $20 per family. For more information, visit coyoteflats.org. And that's your Bridge City News community calendar.
The roller coaster ride when it comes to oil and gas prices may continue. There's a warning that Saudi Arabia and other OPEC nations could cut oil production once again. To talk about this in more detail is our foreign affairs expert Lisa Daftari, joining us once again from Los Angeles. Lisa, the threat from OPEC has to do with Iran and economic dysfunction?
Yeah, well, Saudi Arabia and OPEC in this case know that they have, the upper hand. They have the world really in their fists, and they can do whatever they want. I mean, so much for Biden's trip out to the Middle East to try to convince perhaps Saudi Arabia to put out more oil to kind of balance the global inflation and supply. And obviously the price of gas here in the West is astronomical. And we're up against an election in a couple of months. So it's always nice to bring down the prices in order to get people happier at the polls. But Saudi Arabia says no dice. We're going to even cut production because we know that we control everything. And the message to the White House is we don't like the Iran deal that you're going to go forward with because you are putting more terrorism in the region. You're giving our enemy, remember the Sunni Shiite divide in the Middle East between Iran and Saudi Arabia. You're giving our enemy millions and eventually billions of dollars to put back into terrorism. And since we have the upper hand on oil, then we're going to cut supply. And that's the threat right now.
Israel's defense minister says the revived nuclear deal could see Iran armed with a nuclear bomb by the year 2031, Lisa. Can you explain how that could happen?
Yeah, well, let me back up a bit. Our own envoy, the U.S. envoy to the Iran nuclear deal, meaning the person who's been entrusted with negotiating the deal is Robert Malley. He came out a month ago and said that if we let Iran go, they have the capability of having a weapon in a week. He said literally a week. As we're getting closer to striking a deal, they're saying a month. Now, 2030 is actually a long shot, but the point being that there will always be this sunset clause. Whether we get into a deal with them or not, they're very close to getting a bomb. Now, the only thing that they have not been able to get is the delivery system, and that is something that they can get in a short period of time. And that's the point, that they have been able to laterally grow their program. They've been enriching uranium at a very rapid speed. They have been shutting off the cameras, as we have talked about before. They have been denying access to IAEA inspectors. That is the UN's nuclear watchdog group. And so, yes, we have no control over them and their desire to have a bomb. And that's exactly the point. And that is what Israel's warning. A lot of the moderate Arab states are warning that. A lot of Republicans and Democrats are warning that this is not a good deal.
New intelligence from both Germany and Sweden says Iran's regime allegedly sought out technology for their nuclear weapons. Tell me more about that.
Yeah, and there you go. You know, the EU is very gung-ho on getting a deal. They actually put forward their own version of a deal in order to tie, you know, the Iran regime to some sort of deal. As we know, for months, the West, the US and EU, went into, you know, deals and walked away empty-handed, walked into deals and walked out empty-handed, but they're no quitters. They've not given up on the dream of having an Iran nuclear deal. Now, reports are surfacing from these two European nations saying that, guess what? They have been seeking out the delivery systems and more technology. Remember, under Donald Trump, there was a very targeted pressure campaign, which was sanctioning these aspects of Iran's economy in terms of banking and in terms of technology and their ability to ascertain these the technology and the equipment for their weapons program. So now that's exactly what they've been trying to do, work around that and trying to get the technology and the equipment needed to deliver a weapon. So much for a worthy partner to make a deal with.
Israel's prime minister is hoping to set up a meeting with U.S. President Joe Biden on September 20th, I believe, to discuss how the Iran nuclear deal would directly impact Jerusalem.
Yeah, so this is when everyone's coming to New York for the United Nations General Assembly, like they do every year, but this year is extremely sensitive. Not only is Iran's president coming, but it's the year in which there might even be a deal announced before we get to the General Assembly. So Israeli leaders are trying to get the attention of the White House to say, please don't do this. This is something that we've had our eyes on for a long time, and we don't suggest getting into a deal with Iran. Look, Israel has to fight this threat day in and day out. They are an arms reach away from Tehran. That is the threat that Tehran has made over and over again. The regime has said that they will blow Israel off the map. They call the United States the big Satan and Israel the little Satan. So they have access to the little Satan. And because of that, Israel is warning and trying to get Joe Biden's attention to tell him to please not do this. But it's been very difficult to get an appointment, a phone call, whatever, you know, can kind of have some sort of communication between the two leaders so that they can convey the message. But I'm sure Joe Biden knows exactly what Israel wants to tell him.
So, Lisa, what were some of the biggest reasons why then U.S. President Donald Trump walked away from the Iran nuclear deal?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, you know, if you want to juxtapose the two presidencies, Donald Trump campaigned on pulling out of the Iran deal that Barack Obama got us into in 2015. Joe Biden then campaigned on getting us back into the deal. The reason why President Trump walked away, that was May of 2018. He said this is a deal that means nothing. We have no way of holding Iran accountable for the fact that they are moving forward with their weapons program, and we should be holding them accountable. So, and just to kind of, again, put things side by side, as soon as President Biden campaigned for going right back into the Iran nuclear deal, and obviously the type of liberal foreign policy that he actually showcased as he was running for presidency, Iran outlets that are tied to the regime were actually for President Biden winning the election. Imagine a regime, a rogue regime that is inserting itself in U.S. politics, knows all the nuances of U.S. politics, and is pushing for a certain presidential candidate. That should tell us a lot about the way that President Biden reacted. And ever since President Biden became president, the centrifuges have been spinning at a rapid speed. They shut down 27 surveillance cameras. They denied access to the surveillors, and so on and so on. But President Trump believed that we have no way of holding them accountable. And not only that, the human rights abuses, the fact that they're exporting terror, they're giving money to Hezbollah and Hamas and the Houthis in Yemen, and they are inserting themselves in the war in Syria and in Yemen and in Lebanon, and they're everywhere. And there's no reason for us to be supporting their terror sprees, and we should be able to put sanctions on them, which is exactly what the Trump administration did. And let me tell you, it was extremely, extremely helpful, and we were able to curb them for the time being.
Now, speaking of Hezbollah, the UN's Mideast point man is sounding the alarm about the terrorist group and the activity near Israel's northern border. There are apparently at least 4 border area firing ranges observed in southern Lebanon over the past few months.
Yes, and that's exactly right. Hezbollah is a cancerous terror entity inside Lebanon, which is being funded by Iran's regime. Remember, let me go back in history a bit. In 1980, the Iran regime decided that they can make a terror group called Hezbollah, which means the Party of God, in order to do its dirty work. So that's where this concept of creating Middle East proxies via terror groups came about. Then you had Saudi Arabia that went forward and helped out with the starting out to Al-Qaeda to battle Hezbollah and not allow Iran's influence to grow in the region. So now, of course, this threat is nothing new, especially for Israelis who understand that they are cornered from the north, south, and the west in terms of Hamas and Hezbollah and Palestinian Islamic Jihad. And again, who is footing the bill? The Iran regime, the same regime that the White House wants to help fund and put, again, billions of dollars into their pockets to help fund more terrorism, more deaths, more bloodshed in the region.
Speaking of which, violence between opposing militias has broken out in Libya's capital. Lisa, at least 13 civilians were killed and close to 100 people were wounded, according to the Libyan health minister. And a number of families were also evacuated from areas around the fighting.
Yes, the sad part about this is that we haven't seen any sort of, we've seen it go, kind of wax and wane in terms of activity in Libya, but we haven't seen any sort of stability since their so-called Arab Spring. And the sad part about what you just outlined is that these are in civilian areas, meaning that the terrorists and these terror entities are fighting each other in civilian areas. And it's always, innocent families that are in harm's way, and the casualties are all civilians. This is, it's going to be an ongoing problem because they're having issues in a tribal society. You take down the dictator, and of course more tribalism, and of course in this case terror groups that are interwoven on the ground. And again, they're going to have a very hard time finding a unifying voice, if that's even what they want, but even having peace and stability within these different areas.
Lisa, fears are surrounding the possibility of a leak at Europe's largest nuclear plant as the battle intensifies between Ukraine and Russia. There are accusations now on both sides of rocket and artillery strikes.
Yeah, this is, we've taken our eyes off of what's going on in Ukraine, and it's been 6 months now. But, it intensifies, and the headlines come out whenever there's a story like this. Obviously, they're in and around this nuclear plant, and obviously we all know the scenarios that can play out and be horrific. There's again, no off-ramp for Putin, and he will continue going. And the Ukrainians believe that they can really hold him off. And I don't know what the solution will be or what the de-escalation can be in this case, but hopefully the escalation will not involve any nuclear material, or hopefully the people around that area can get out safely and really stay out of harm's way. This is a horrible, horrible story.
Yeah, we don't want to see another Chernobyl happen here. Now, you and I discuss in great detail the large number of migrants who are making their way to the U.S. border, hoping to cross from Central America, South America, thousands of people in those massive caravans. Now, there are reports that since the beginning of the year, 25,000 illegal immigrants have been detected crossing the English Channel, hoping to reach the United Kingdom.
Right. Well, I would say that the European nations are experiencing something in a domino effect of what's going on in the United States. But I will say that the Europeans had this influx of migrants before the United States started having their caravans. In the aftermath of the Arab Spring, places like the UK and France and Germany and other places saw such a huge influx of migrants. And I will tell you, they have buyer's remorse for having such lax policies and allowing these migrants to come in unvetted. We've had terror attacks, we've had car rammings, we've had school bombings, we've had bombings in concerts. So I think the Europeans, and one of the reasons for Brexit wasn't just the economic incentive for the UK, but it was also the lax policies of the EU that they wanted to get away from in terms of migration, in terms of allowing these migrants to come in unvetted, and the national security risk that it was posing for the Britons. So I think that they will have probably a harsher stance, if I had to guess, but the numbers are astounding. The fact that there are 25,000 lined up and are trying to come in and have, basically made up their minds to make this trek, it's going to be very difficult to stop them, but perhaps the UK can come up with a system of vetting or, something where they do not repeat the mistakes of the past decade in terms of allowing this national security risk to progress.
And what's the latest with some of the illegal immigrants trying to cross into the United States as well?
Well, yeah, we have it's a crazy story of hypocrisy, Hal. We have obviously almost 500 migrants a day coming into certain parts of our porous border in the south. Now, Greg Abbott, who's the governor of Texas, has taken a very bold move in busing these migrants to places like Metro DC and New York City. And New York City and DC are all upset about it. And the mayor of DC actually tried to call in the National Guard twice and was denied by the Pentagon, of course, because these are the bluest cities in our nation who are all very pro open borders and want these migrants to come in. But when they stop at their doorstep and they have to absorb them, then they get upset. There's also all kinds of ideas like putting them up at luxury hotels for the time being. And of course, residents in these upscale neighborhoods are very upset by it. But again, it goes to show that, if it's not good for you, it's not good for your neighboring state or a southern state. And the sheer number of people coming in, let alone the risk of, drug trafficking and human trafficking and the children that are getting lost and abused and, the unknown, the national security risk and all the bad guys trying to embed themselves. We're all for immigration, but legal immigration and not illegal immigration. And that's really what the U.S. is dealing with right now. The sheer number of people coming in makes it impossible to vet them, makes it impossible to prevent disease and drugs and all other, nefarious things from coming in. So that's what we're dealing with at the moment.
Foreign affairs expert and political reporter Lisa Daftari, thanks so much for joining us today from Los Angeles.
My pleasure.
Well, the University of Lethbridge has received a $100,000 grant from the Canadian Space Agency to train the next generation of space scientists. The U of L is one of 21 post-secondary institutions in the country to receive a grant through the CSA's Flights and Fieldwork for the Advancement of Science and Technology Funding Initiative. It's a mouthful, but joining me now to discuss this is Dr. David Naylor. He is the physics and astronomy professor and the head of the Astronomical Instrumentation Group at the University of Lethbridge. Dr. Naylor, thanks so much for joining me today.
Hey, I appreciate it.
Okay, awesome. So, Dr. Naylor, this is big, exciting news for the university and for Canada, I would say, but I'm going to let you explain what this grant is for exactly because it's kind of a mouthful. So, in a nutshell, it's to train the next generation of space scientists in the development of what? A cryogenic something?
Yes. So, most of your viewers may know that Canada is going to be going to the moon. On a project called the Lunar Gateway. And the Canadian Space Agency has joined forces with NASA to on this project that will see a Canadian be the second nation on the boots on the ground on the moon. So someone in school today will be a Canadian who will have be only the second nation to step foot on the moon, which is really exciting. And so the Canadian Space Agency funds development in technology so that you mitigate the risk. So things that space is risk, that's all it is as a, and you have to mitigate that. And you need to train the next generation of students who become scientists in the technology that will be needed for the future generations. So that's what this is all about. And we're particularly targeting technology that has a path to the moon and some other experiments that we're dealing with as well.
That's incredible news. It's very exciting. And so what will this grant money do exactly? What will the U of L do with it?
So when you do research, there are two things you look at. One is getting the equipment, the infrastructure, the hardware. And the second is the money to train students. And so we've been given funding from different grants for equipment. We have 4 industrial partners that are contributing upwards of $2 million. And this piece of the puzzle is for training of students. So these students will be high school students, possibly. We have had some in the past, undergraduate students, graduate students, and so forth. So we're training the next generation of bright minds on technology that will be required to tackle the problems that will be coming down the pipes in the coming years.
That's amazing. So maybe paint a picture for me. So what will the students and researchers be able to do because of this grant and this program?
So most people don't realize that the moon in some ways is actually harder than Mars as an environment. Mars is really about a temperature of minus 50 degrees, minus 60 degrees Celsius. So Antarctica is actually colder than Mars, but the moon gets significantly colder around 200 Celsius, minus 200 Celsius. And that is because of its orbit, and it's sheltered. The night on the moon is 14 Earth days. So it means that surviving lunar night is a real challenge, and you have to have instrumentation that's checked out to do that. And we have the largest cryogenic test facility, which is kind of like an enormous beer fridge. I mean, it gets much colder, much faster, but it cools to temperatures that nowhere else can be achieved really for the volume that we have. So we can in principle cool a small rover, a medium rover, and a nano rover in our cryogenic facilities. So students will be exposed to the technology that is associated with this kind of work. Basically, when you put things, if you get a glass of pop and put an ice cube in it, it cracks, it shatters. That thermal gradient just causes the ice cube to crack when you have a pop from the fridge. And pretty much everything you cool to these temperatures breaks. The optical, thermal, electrical, mechanical properties, everything, the properties of everything just fail as you get to extremely low temperatures. And so you must be able to design systems that will survive extreme cooling. And that's what we're doing.
Interesting.
The CSA calls it the Flights and Fieldwork for Space Technology, but the acronym is FAST. It's a very nice acronym. It's basically you have to simulate a space environment. And we're one of the few labs in Canada that can really do that.
This project must simulate a realistic space environment. So what does that look like in terms of what the students will be doing in the lab at the U of L? Can you maybe give us some examples?
It looks like a big metal tank. You can imagine it as a submarine. When you go in a submarine, it takes some time to get down to the bottom of the ocean. And you can stay there for a long time, but you must be careful when you ascend. You can't come up too quickly or you will get the bends. And it's similar in the sense that when you cool down, like the ice cube in the glass of pop, if you cool down too quickly, the ice cube will shatter. And so we have got to go down to extremely low temperatures, and we can stay there pretty much indefinitely, which is just surprising. And we can get 10 times colder than anywhere in the universe can be. With our cryostat, we can actually get down to 0.3 Kelvin. So it takes a long time to get down there, but then we can stay there. And our record is almost a couple of months staying at that low temperature. And the problem, like a submarine, if you forget to take your toothpaste, then you're stuck because you've got to wait to come up. So when we cool things, we've got to be absolutely sure that we have everything in the cryostat that we will need as we go down. So it's meticulous work, it's careful work, and we're pretty good at what we do here. So we're training the next generation of students in this technology.
Okay, so Dr. Naylor, is this cryogenic tank actually physically at the University of Lethbridge then, or is it off-site somewhere?
No. It's on the top level of the new science building. So we have to be on the top level because we need a lot of compressors to cool it. So they're in the penthouse. And so we're on level 9 in the science building, and it was designed fit for purpose. So this is the first time we've had a lab that's been equipped specifically for this task.
That's absolutely incredible. So this new type of spectrometer has been identified by the world's leading space agencies like NASA, right, as a necessary step to explore the galaxy. Can you explain why?
It gets tricky pretty quickly, but we now know the. So when you explore the universe, you look at different wavelengths, different colors, So with your eye, you can see the planets out there tonight. But it turns out that most of the energy emitted by the universe is detected in the infrared. That's beyond the limit of human vision. And so you need certain types of detectors and certain types of instrumentation. And the physics is complex, but it boils down to the fact that you have to cool your detectors to extremely low temperatures to work. And then you've got competing contrasting requirements. You would like to cover a full spectral band, a broad spectral band. So if you were thinking about the rainbow of colors, you've got green through to yellow through to red, you've got the whole rainbow. And at the same time, you might want to know, well, is it, lemon yellow, or is it a bolder yellow within the color range? And so the task is to cover a broad spectral range at very high spectral resolution. And that's a challenge. And so the space agencies have realized that this a hybrid technology is going to be required. And NASA has identified this, the European Space Agency, with whom we do a lot of work as well. They know that this is the route to go. And so it's on the technology gap. Every year, NASA publishes a technology gap review. Where are we missing in technology? And then the world scientists like ourselves try to fill in those gaps as best we can. So yeah, I think we know Einstein said the smartest person is the one who poses the right question, not whether you can answer it. The right question is that we need this type of instrument, and now we're trying to develop the instrument, which is well on the path, and we need to train the next generation of students in how to use it, really.
Okay, so we've pretty much determined that this is an important step in the future of space exploration. So could something like this reduce future mission risk and cost then?
Well, yes. I mean, space is all about risk. I mean, you don't get into this game if you're risk averse. So you have to make sure you've got redundancy, full redundancy. So whenever we launch anything, you make sure that there are ways that you can reprogram it. You basically carry two of everything: 2 lasers, 2 detectors, 2 drives, to whatever it is. You have redundancy, and then you also have a redundancy in your hardware, your firmware, and so you can reprogram and reconfigure the spacecraft should there be problems. And so what you don't want to do, and I've been involved in space for 4 decades. I worked at the European Space Agency. What you don't want to do is to launch something and then find out, oh, it doesn't work, and here's why. And we've been in those positions. And so you do as much testing, soaking as you can, and you try. And now the requirement is you must test in a realistic space condition, and that's the new space driver, that you must be able to show that you can evaluate the performance of your instrument in the conditions that it's going to experience once it gets out there. And that is what we do. So we can generate. We've got one of the most realistic space simulators in Canada because of the low temperature side. Many people can generate a high vacuum, but we have high vacuum and extremely low temperatures, and that's precisely what is going to be needed to reduce the risk. So we need to identify problems on the ground where we have a chance of fixing them and redesigning them before we launch a $10 billion thing, and then we find out, oh yeah, we should have thought about that.
So Dr. Naylor, has the University of Lethbridge taken part in any such study or project before? Like, maybe you can explain in what ways the U of L has shaped space exploration in the past, or is this a first for the university?
The University of Lethbridge, our group's been funded by the Canadian Space Agency for almost 20 years. We've been funded by ESA as well, and also NASA, actually. We have an instrument that flew on a U-2 aircraft, Earth ER2 aircraft. So we're pretty old hands at this. And we built up the technology over, as I say, over several decades to become really the leading cryogenic space facility in Canada.
That's amazing. Has Canada had much involvement in influencing space exploration?
You know, that's yes and no. We're a small country, really, and so the tax base is small. So our space agency does not get the kind of funding that NASA does, for sure. Europe, the countries in Europe joined together to form the European Space Agency, and you have, I forget the number, but it's probably 15 countries, maybe more, and they each chip in, and then they do big things. Japan does it on its own, Russia did it on its own, China does it on its own. So Canada can't do it on its own. We just don't have the resources to do it. But there are a lot of really talented scientists and engineers in Canada. And what happens is that NASA and ESA invite us to join their teams. So Canada gets involved in space because of the expertise and excellence that exists in the professors in universities across Canada. And it's interesting because we have ties with Europe and America, we actually get involved with both agencies. I've worked with NASA and with ESA, and sometimes NASA and ESA don't work well together, but we're in a kind of a neat position that we can join forces with both, and we get invited to. So we've been invited to participate in a mission that is being considered by NASA.
That is extremely, extremely cool. How much time do you think it will be before a Canadian steps foot on the moon?
Well, I mean, that's a good question. Canada joined into the Lunar Gateway project, so Prime Minister Trudeau committed $2 billion to that effort, and in return for supporting that work, Canada gets a flight to the moon for a Canadian. So the second nationality to step foot on the moon will not be Russian or Chinese. Well, I mean, perhaps it could be, but it is going to be a Canadian after Americans, which is really kind of exciting. We don't actually know yet. The Artemis project is going to go back, and they're thinking probably 2025. And when the Canadian will be there, it's not clear. There will be a launch slot and a seat on the spacecraft, but it really will be a big thing for Canada.
Oh, it's giving me chills just thinking about it. Dr. Naylor, thanks so much for joining me today, and all the best in this study.
Hey, I appreciate it. Thanks.
Absolutely. Dr. David Naylor is a physics and astronomy professor and head of the Astronomical Instrumentation Group at the University of Lethbridge. I'm Jeanette Roche on behalf of all of us here at Bridge City News. Thanks for watching.